Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Nerdy Talk. I, of course, am Artsy Omni, and it's been a few days since the big Switch presentation, so there's been a little bit of time to sort of check the pulse on the gaming community as a whole, see how all of the people in the industry are reacting to all of the new information, and I've had a lot of time for myself to sort of process everything. So I wanted to make a video talking about my thoughts and some of my concerns, now that we have all this new information. And depending on how long it takes to talk about some of these topics, I may or may not talk about some of the actual games that they showed. We'll see. But to start out, let's talk about the hardware itself. Now, I should mention that I'm not really much of a spec head. I care more about a game's design and its actual gameplay rather than things like draw distance and frame rates and things like that. Not to say that I don't care about those things at all, but, they're never a deal breaker for me. Obviously, if you're going to make a good game, you do have to care about things like frame rate and stuff like that. But that's not my point. The point is, I'm only going to be talking about a few of the major points that I think are worth noting because they have a larger bearing on the actual user experience of using the device as a gaming device. So this isn't going to be, a comprehensive overview of all of the specs or anything like that. I'm not going to go over everything in great detail, or at least I don't think I am. Knowing my track record, I might just end up talking about literally everything that I can. But we'll see. Maybe I'm fooling myself. But I just want to talk about all of the details that interest me personally. Obviously, I'm not a news channel. I don't cover everything. So this is really just my perspective on things. And there's plenty of people on YouTube who are already talking about specs and have analyzed things like frame rate in great detail. In fact, I was watching a video on Digital Foundry that was going over frame rates of games like Breath of the Wild and Splatoon 2. So those videos are out there. If you're interested in those types of videos, go find them for yourself. I'm not going to point you to them. But starting out, let's talk about what's probably the most obvious thing to talk about, which is the Switch screen. Obviously, if you're going to be using this thing as a handheld, you have to have a screen on it. So let's talk about it. The screen is a 6.2-inch screen, 720p. That's 1280 by 720 in resolution. And if we do a quick calculation, we can determine that the pixel density is roughly 237 pixels per inch. Now, to put that in perspective, my Retina MacBook screen is 220 pixels per inch, so it's actually higher density than my Retina MacBook Pro. Now, that's not to say that a MacBook Pro screen is one of the greatest displays on Earth or anything like that. There's definitely screens that are higher density than that. But I'm looking at my screen right now, and it is a nice screen. The text on here is so sharp. So the fact that the Switch has an even higher density than my MacBook Pro, I think is a very, very good sign. 237 pixels per inch is not anything to sneeze at, especially when compared to the Wii U gamepad screen, which was a 480p screen, and it was only 158 pixels per inch. So much, much better screen. Quite a leap, to be honest. And to give it even more perspective, just for fun, standard print resolution for raster graphics is 300 pixels per inch. Now that's a printed page in a commercial product, like a magazine or something like that. So if you look at a page with a photo on it and you don't see any pixels, that thing is at least 300 pixels per inch. So I don't understand why all of these companies out here are trying to make all of these crazy high-density screens with things like 400 pixels per inch. You can't see the difference between 300 pixels per inch and 400 pixels per inch. It's effectively the same thing unless you have your eye 1 inch away from the screen. But that's a completely irrational thing to do. So anyways, I'm not going to go on a soapbox tirade about screen density. The point is, the Switch has a nice screen. Things are going to look really sharp. From what I understand, the color is very vivid, very vibrant, I should say. So I'm not worried about the screen in the least bit at all. So we should probably move on. Storage. A lot of people were concerned about storage. Now, the Switch only has 32 gigabytes of storage out of the box, which is exactly the same as what the Wii U premium package, I don't remember what it was actually called, but that's the same amount of storage that you had in your Wii U. And I know a lot of people who were buying a lot of games on the eShop and downloading all of their titles ran out of space pretty quickly. But the Switch supports micro SD cards. So unlike the Wii U, where you had to actually buy an external USB hard drive and hook that thing up to the back of it or wherever, It wasn't pretty. This thing lets you augment your internal storage by adding a micro SD card. Now, the Switch supports micro SD cards that go up to 2 terabytes of storage, and my mind was blown when I learned that there were 2 terabyte micro SD cards. That's insane. I have an external hard drive hooked up to my computer here where I keep all of my Smashified footage, and that's a lot of footage, and I still haven't filled it all up. So, yeah, needless to say, you can really augment this thing's storage. Now, I understand that 32 gigabytes out of the box is not a lot, but think about it this way. Solid state storage on a device like this is a pretty significant expense. So adding more and more to the cost just by adding more storage is not something they want to do if they want to keep the price point low. And the price point is already a sticking point for certain people. So the fact that they're leaving it at 32 and letting people augment it to the extent that they see fit, I think that's the best way to go. So appeal to the lowest common denominator with 32 gigabytes and let people add to that with a micro SD card, which is a very unintrusive way to add storage. Let people do that as much as they see fit. If you want 256 gigabytes, you can do that. If you want 512, you can do that. If you want 2 terabytes, you can do that if you're crazy rich and you can afford like a $200 micro SD card. Anyway, given the fact that higher capacity micro SD cards are, like I said, pretty expensive, a lot of people are probably going to end up buying several smaller SD cards over time. But if you're going to end up, carrying around a bunch of tiny SD cards, why not just get a carry case of Switch cartridges? I mean, it seems like they may not be as small as a micro SD card, but they're also not as easy to snap in half. I mean, micro SD cards are really thin, and I've seen people break them. I remember at one point, my brother, he had his micro SD card in the SD adapter, so it was the size of, a regular SD card with the adapter, and I guess he was leaning on it or something with his elbow, and the adapter bent a little bit, and inside, the micro SD card just snapped. So they're really easy to break. They're also really easy to lose. And unless you dish out the money for, like I said, a really high capacity micro SD card, you're going to end up having to keep track of which games are on which cards. And that does not seem like a fun time to me. I don't know, maybe I'm just old fashioned, but I think cartridges are the way to go. And I mean, the games, from what I understand, they read directly off of the cartridge when you're playing them. So load times are going to be just fine. I imagine they'd be comparable to a downloaded title, because they're going to have to read off the SD card anyways, right? So, and I mean, I've seen load time comparisons between the E3 Breath of the Wild build on the Wii U and the Breath of the Wild on the Switch from the recent event, and I don't know if this could be chalked up to optimizations since the E3 build, so maybe the difference isn't really as stark between the two versions, but the difference was night and day. I'm talking like 15-second differences between load times on the Wii U version versus the Switch version. That's a big difference. So, I mean, I can't see a reason why you wouldn't want to go with cartridges. Actually, you know what? Here's my recommendation. Get yourself a micro SD card with decent capacity, like maybe 256 or 512 gigabytes, something that stays in your system, that never comes out, that you use for your eShop games or your virtual console titles, the things that won't eat up like dozens of gigabytes per game. That way, you never risk losing or breaking that SD card that you keep in the system, but you also have some decent augmented internal storage to work with. And then you just buy physical media for your bigger games like Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, Splatoon 2, things like that. I think that's the best of both worlds. I think that's a good balance to achieve. And I don't know, maybe unless you're one of those people that just really likes downloading your titles, I don't see a reason why you wouldn't want to do that, because this thing is also not that small. It's not like a 3DS where you can just kind of carry it around without having to worry about putting it in a bag or something like that. It's not going to fit in your pocket, the Switch, that is. So you already have to kind of treat it like a tablet or even like kind of like a laptop, So it makes sense that you're just going to have to be carrying around a few different ancillary accessories to your Switch. So why not just carry around the cartridges? I don't know. That's my opinion, of course. But I don't know what the typical prices are for a higher capacity micro SD card. I think it's somewhere around maybe 100 or so for a 512, or maybe even for a 256. I don't know. From a quick search, it seems like the prices are like all over the place, depending on, I guess, the different brands, or maybe there's different types of SD cards that cost more based on maybe read-write speed. I don't know. I've been talking way too long about SD cards. I need to move on to something else. Let's talk about some of the other features of the hardware. 8-player local wireless, very cool. I'm probably not going to have many opportunities to use that because I don't imagine most of my friends are going to buy a Switch. I don't know, unless this thing really takes off and like all the people that I didn't expect to buy one. But I think there's 2 people in my life that are thinking about getting one. So I don't know. It's really great though. I think that's going to be a really nice feature, especially if you go to a con or something like that and you just want to play with a bunch of strangers. That'll be great. So 8-player local wireless, that is between 8 different Switch units wirelessly. Good deal. Controllers. All of the controller configurations contain a gyroscope and an accelerometer. So if you want to play Splatoon with gyro controls with a Pro Controller, you can do that. Now I know there's a large segment of the gaming community that avoids motion controls like the plague. And I imagine that's largely thanks to their experiences with motion control on the Wii, but unless you're not paying attention, you should know that motion controls have come a long way since the original Wii Remote. I mean, even the Wii Remote Plus was a huge step above the original Wii Remote. So I don't understand all these people talking about waggling. New games that utilize motion controls don't do waggle anymore. It's actually quite impressive how well motion controls work these days. Now, it's not always flawless, I'll give you that, but it's definitely leaps and bounds over the crazy, silly waggle controls that you would see in things like Twilight Princess or Mario Galaxy, so it's worth mentioning. And I've been hearing a lot of impressions about gyroscopic controls for games like ARMS, and from what I understand, they're even more responsive than a Wii U gamepad was. And I already thought that was great for games like Splatoon, so I'm pretty happy that we don't have to settle for dual analog for games like Splatoon, which I despise. I know it's a standard for consoles, but I never got good at it, and I could go into tirade about how unintuitive dual analog controls are compared to gyroscopic controls, obviously compared to a mouse and keyboard, but I'm not going to touch that. I'm just going to leave that alone. But let's talk about the Joy-Cons. I obviously put a video together called The Joy-Con Dilemma, so I was very invested in how the Joy-Cons would unfold, and we learned a lot more about the Joy-Cons. We got confirmation that there are indeed 2 shoulder buttons on the rail that connects to the screen, which are called the SR and SL buttons. So not only that, we were also shown a new wrist strap attachment, which actually augments the form factor of the controller by sliding over that rail and then giving you a slightly larger SR and SL button to press. And so I think that's really great. Now, one of the other big features that we saw a lot of in the presentation itself, as well as the subsequent Treehouse stream footage, was the HD Rumble. Now, this is a pretty polarizing feature from what I've seen on the internet. I guess a lot of people don't see the value in it, and I can understand that to a certain extent, because obviously this is technology that is going to be driving the price of the Switch up, and the price of the Joy-Cons up, and we can talk about price in a little bit, but yeah, I can understand why people would be upset about this type of technology being included when it doesn't really add all that much to a game, but from what I've been told, it really does offer a versatility in haptic feedback that we haven't really seen from games before. So I am pretty curious about what this feels like. I really want to try it for myself because just hearing people describe it is very difficult, and it's definitely something that has to be experienced probably rather than described. And I imagine that's probably what's holding a lot of people back from really getting on board with this new idea of HD Rumble and haptic feedback when it's really not something that we've really needed in game design before. So we'll see how that plays out. I can't really say that much more about that. But the Joy-Cons, I think, I'm still a little bit reserved when it comes to the actual ergonomics of the thing, because the face buttons, once again, I've talked about this a lot, but the face buttons are directly over the analog stick, which means it's a little bit more uncomfortable moving from the face buttons to the analog stick. And I've heard people talk about this, like Ash Paulson was saying that moving from the face buttons to the analog stick when playing Breath of the Wild in the handheld mode, which is when the Joy-Cons are attached to the screen, he felt that it was a little bit uncomfortable because he ended up just pressing or moving the stick with his thumb joint rather than, the pad of his thumb. And I can see that being a problem, but I don't really know what to do about it because your thumb is going to have to kind of climb over the analog stick to get to the face buttons. I don't, I mean, we've talked about this. I get why it's designed that way. It kind of has to be that way if they're going to use the Joy-Cons horizontally. But again, I'm probably going to be using the Pro Controller more often than not, or at least the Joy-Con grip. From what I understand, because the Joy-Con grip handles are angled inward from the bottom to the top, it makes it a little bit more comfortable to move from the face buttons to the analog stick. I don't really know if that's true, but I obviously can't know until I try it for myself, so I shouldn't probably talk about this anymore. I do think this is a good point to sort of segue into some of my other concerns for the entire Switch as a whole. So why don't we do that? And I think the biggest hurdle that the Switch has to overcome is the price point. Because Nintendo is marketing this thing as a home console first and foremost, despite the fact that logic would say that this thing is more of a handheld that you dock to your TV, not a console that you take on the go. And no matter how much Nintendo tries to market this thing as console first, handheld second, or rather a third pillar, consumer perception is all that matters. And I don't know about you guys, but when the DS came out, I didn't think of that as a third pillar. I thought of that as the thing that came after the Game Boy Advance. And it was only in hindsight that more of us came to the understanding that Nintendo considered that a third pillar separate from the Game Boy line, but because the Game Boy stopped selling, they just used the DS as their new handheld pillar. I don't think the consumers out there understand this third pillar mentality that Nintendo has, so they see this thing, they're probably going to think it's a handheld, because it looks like a handheld. It doesn't look like a console. So I don't know what Nintendo's thinking. I mean, I guess it's all just marketing, and the same thing will happen with this that happened with the DS, assuming that the Switch is successful. So despite the fact that they call it a third pillar, if the 3DS sales start to dip and start to fall off because this thing is kind of filling that need for a handheld, they're obviously going to kill off the 3DS. Now, Reggie has said very recently that the 3DS is still alive and kicking, but we'll see how well that holds up in the coming years. Anyways, I'm really starting to get off topic. I was talking about price. So this hurdle that the Switch needs to overcome, the price point. A lot of people don't seem to think that the Switch has enough value for that price, which is, of course, $299, effectively $300. I'm just going to say $300. Now, I think that price point is completely justified given what the actual Switch contains. Now, there's a lot of pretty sophisticated tech in there, even though it's not necessarily all tech that directly influences the graphical output of the system. It's still tech in the system. It's something that they had to spend money on to put in the system. Now, of course, the sticking point for a lot of people is that some of the technology in the Switch, be it the HD Rumble or the gyroscopes or really anything that isn't, a video card and a processor and all of the standard button inputs on the controllers, stuff that most people relegate to being quote-unquote Nintendo gimmicks. Some of that tech isn't interesting to a specific demographic. So essentially, a lot of people see that technology as wasted space. And that makes that $300 price point too high because they end up paying for things that they don't really care about. Now, the fact is, value is subjective. If you don't value the so-called gimmicks of the console, then the price is obviously going to be too much for you. But if you find that non-standard technology interesting, and if you're open to those types of more unusual experiences and input methods, then the value adds up and it aligns with the price point in a way that makes sense. That being said, it's hard to argue that the controllers aren't too expensive. A Pro controller is $70, which is $10 more than a brand new standard Xbox One controller. Now, I think the price, again, is justified because there is a gyroscope and an accelerometer in there, which obviously is a little bit more cost. But again, if those features don't appeal to you, then that's $10 you probably feel like you shouldn't have to pay for. But in the end, I imagine the $70 for the Pro controller probably isn't going to be a huge deal. I mean, obviously, a lot of us are disappointed for that price, but we're going to get over it over time, and we're going to buy it because we need it, because it's the Pro controller. It's the most standard controller, and a lot of people need that. I'm one of those people. Not that I don't like the motion control and stuff like that, but I really want to have a nice standard controller that I can use for standard experiences. But the real kicker is the Joy-Con. Now, the Joy-Con individually, by itself, one single Joy-Con, one half of the unit, basically. One Joy-Con is $50, which is $10 more than a Wii Remote Plus at MSRP. Now, you can usually find a Wii Remote Plus now for a little bit less than that, but I'm just going to call it, for the sake of this video, I'm going to call it $40. Now, we can probably assume that the Joy-Con is slightly more expensive because it contains the new HD Rumble capabilities and what I assume is a slightly more sophisticated gyroscope. So I think $50 is probably justified, but I also imagine that the profit margin on the Joy-Con is a little wider than the Wii Remote. And I say that because the pair of Joy-Cons bundled together is $80, which puts each Joy-Con at essentially the same price as a Wii Remote Plus, $40. So I can see sort of two possibilities here. The first case would be that the individual Joy-Con is selling at a pretty wide profit margin, or the second case would be that a single Joy-Con has a reasonable profit margin and the pair would be selling at a loss. And I cannot see the latter being the case. So I'm assuming that the single Joy-Con is actually being priced pretty aggressively. Now, the weird part about all of this is that while a single Joy-Con can easily be considered a complete controller, at least when you compare it to a Wii Remote, psychologically, it kind of feels like half of a controller, you know? Because, well, for the sake of example, let's compare a Wii Remote Plus and a Joy-Con. Now, the Joy-Con has 4 face buttons. It's got 2 different pairs of shoulder buttons. You've got the 2 on the rail, and you've got the 2 on the top when you hold it vertically. It has an analog stick and a couple of ancillary buttons, the plus and minus or the home and share, depending on which one you have. Now, we can probably assume that the plus and minus buttons are going to be used as a start button or a pause button, whatever you want to call that. Both the left and right Joy-Cons also have the HD Rumble system, which is probably a different set of motors, and it has a gyro and accelerometer. Now, the right Joy-Con actually seems to be slightly more valuable, I think, than the left Joy-Con because it's the one that has the IR sensor, and it also has the NFC reader. And from what I understand, there's no NFC reader on the left one. But for the sake of this example, let's just pretend that both Joy-Cons are equivalent. Now, the Wii Remote Plus has the 1 and 2 buttons, A and B, a D-pad, plus and minus, and a home button. And it also has its own rumble motor. The Plus has the gyroscope and the accelerometer, and there's a speaker and, of course, the IR sensor for detecting the infrared lights on the sensor bar. Those two controllers have a pretty comparable feature set in terms of the overall value. And I realize that this comparison might be a little bit cheesy because, you can't necessarily put a price on a controller by counting the number of buttons and assigning each one with some kind of monetary value. But do you see my point? A Joy-Con is definitely a standalone controller. But again, it's a little weird because the left Joy-Con doesn't seem to have as many features as the right Joy-Con. So the fact that both individual Joy-Cons are priced equally, it's a little bit strange. I think maybe even unjustified. But the value of at least the right Joy-Con, to me, is hard to dispute. Now, despite the fact that one Joy-Con is a comparable value to a Wii Remote Plus, it still only represents 1/2 of a larger whole. So really, a Joy-Con pair is essentially an extremely functional controller that can be separated into 2 smaller controllers, smaller, less functional, but still feature-complete controllers, at least in comparison, again, to the Wii Remote Plus. So the way I see it, having 2 Joy-Con pairs is like having 4 Wii Remote Pluses. Now, myself personally, I don't see myself getting more than 2 additional Joy-Cons. So I'd have 2 grips, 4 Joy-Cons, and I'd probably get myself maybe 2 Pro controllers. Because I can't think of an instance where you'd need 4 Joy-Con grips with a pair of Joy-Cons in each one. Because if you're going to have any sort of 4-player multiplayer that requires 4 standard control sets, you can just use 2 Pro controllers and then 2 sets of Joy-Cons. That makes sense, right? Because if you have 2 Pro controllers and 2 Joy-Con pairs, then you essentially have the functionality of 4 Pro controllers. Only 2 of them have weird D-pads, which I guess probably is a deal breaker for some people, but you get the point. Oh, by the way, I just wanted to mention, I was totally right about how they're going to be handling button prompts when you are using the sideways Joy-Con. They're just going to show all 4 of the buttons in that diamond configuration, and then they're just going to highlight the button that they want you to press. which I think is actually a pretty elegant solution now that I'm seeing it in practice. But I was totally right about that, so yay me, I guess. I was right about something. But anyways, I don't know. This whole hybrid 2 Joy-Cons make one controller, but they're also one controller each by themselves. It really makes it difficult to quantify the value of the Joy-Cons. But what's even more difficult to explain is the price of the dock. The dock costs $90. I'm sure you already know this, but why does a dock cost $90? What is inside the dock that justifies that price? I will say, though, I think the gaming media are forgetting the fact that the dock is also essentially a USB hub, because it's not just the USB charger that plugs into the USB-C on the bottom of the Switch, and it's not just an HDMI out. It does have those 2 USB ports, but I still can't see how that adds up to $90 either, even if the 2 USB ports are 3.0 or something higher than that, if that's not the most recent anymore. I don't even know. I just can't see how $90 is the price. I mean, how can the dock be nearly 1/3 of the price of the Switch? It doesn't make any sense. I don't know. I was really looking forward to having 2 docks for my Switch too, but now I really have to reconsider that proposition, or at least see if the price of that goes down. I don't know. Long story short, the price is going to be a big issue, and they need to figure that out, because the Switch doesn't even come bundled with a game. I was really thinking that 1-2 Switch would be the perfect title to bundle with the game, but they're asking for $50 for that game, and I understand that it's probably going to be more than the 5 mini games that they showed, but if you're not going to bundle a game, that means you're basically paying $350 to be able to play the thing, because there's no games on it. I don't know, I really hope that gamers who aren't hardcore Nintendo fans can really see the potential that this hardware has, because I think it does have a lot more potential than the Wii U did, but people are going to have to kind of imagine what it could be, because the games aren't there yet at launch. And I know they did announce a lot of games that are going to be coming out throughout the year, which is good. And apparently the SNES also had a similarly slim launch. Like, I think it was 2 games that came out for the SNES, and look how that turned out. I mean, a lot of people love the SNES, you know? SNES. Sorry, Andre Seegers. But yeah, so I feel like this isn't a death knell for the system, but if they don't get enough adoption out the gate, those third-party publishers that are promising support, they are going to leave. And I know there's 80 games that are currently being developed for the Switch, but who's to say that those don't get canceled if things go south? I mean, I imagine a lot of those games aren't going to come out until year 2 or year 3. And some of the games that they showed in that sizzle reel at the end of the presentation, some of those games were re-releases. So you've got games like Rayman Legends, Lego City Undercover. I'd have to rewatch it to see in some of the other ones, but I know they were there. Look at that, Minecraft story mode. They've got Dragon Ball Xenoverse, obviously Skyrim, FIFA, there's another one. So yeah, a pretty significant portion of those 80 games are going to be re-releases. And I don't know, maybe it's going to be like 20% of them. That's just like a prediction. I don't know. Just a guess, really. But all these reservations of mine are really making me want to just look at some of the games again that they showed. I think I'm just going to do that. I downloaded a few of the trailers just so I could watch them. But yeah, let's talk about the game. So 1-2 Switch. Let's just go in order. 1-2 Switch was a game that doesn't really interest me, and I hope that there's a lot more than 5 minigames in there. Otherwise, it's really hard to justify that $50 price tag. I don't really know what else there is to say about this game other than the fact that apparently it really does utilize that HD Rumble really well. So if that is a showcase of what they can do with HD Rumble, maybe third parties will be on board with trying to develop for that. Although Nintendo really needs to make it easy on them and give them some sort of SDK for creating some of those tactile sensations that you get in 1-2 Switch, because if developers have to figure out for themselves how to accomplish some of the common things like a motor running in Mario Kart or some sort of collision, then that's going to be a deterrent for adoption of HD Rumble among developers. What they really need to do is do what Unreal Engine 4 does and just do some of the work for developers so that they can just pick from a library of possible haptic feedback types that they can use. That would really be nice. And then they can just kind of tweak it from there, maybe have a set of presets. But if they make HD Rumble difficult to develop for, you're not going to get third parties using it. And then you're just going to have a bunch of Nintendo games that utilize the gimmicks. I don't want to call them gimmicks because that's very has a very negative connotation, but only Nintendo's going to utilize those features of the Switch, and that's going to be a huge bummer. Although I will say it's probably better that third parties ignore the HD Rumble and still have games on the system than have developers feel pressured to use that HD Rumble and then not put out as many games because they can't come up with ideas that really utilize those features. So I'm of two minds about it. I don't know. But the second game that they showed was ARMS, of course. And this is a game that I feel like it's sort of doing what Splatoon did in taking a genre that's already pretty well established and taking a new spin on it. Although I will say that Splatoon had it a bit easier because, one, the shooter genre, the competitive or multiplayer shooter genre is already very popular, whereas fighting games as a genre is a little bit more niche. I don't know how you say that word, but that is a little bit more of an uphill battle. They also need to prove that the motion controls are going to be worthwhile, because in Splatoon, the gyro controls are very easy to kind of understand, and those are also very proven, whereas with a boxing game, we already had a boxing game with Wii Sports, and a lot of people already have this preconceived notion that a boxing game is essentially just kind of flailing your arms around, and from what I've seen from various impressions of people who actually played the game, that is not what ARMS is, but they really do need to hammer that home, that this is actually a very responsive control set, and they also need to introduce a lot more variety than what they showed, because they only showed 5 characters, which is okay, I guess, but I think for this game to really have legs, they need to have a roster that's pretty broad, and they also need to have more variety in the stages, and I see in the trailer that there's like columns in one of those stages, so there is going to be some variety there, but they really need to prove that this is a very full-fledged, complete package, and not just like one mini-game-sized experience that costs $60. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I think the character designs are really on point. They've got a lot of personality, there's a lot of distinction between the various characters, they really clearly read as characters who have different attributes, so I really like the visual design here. From what I understand, it's the same team that was responsible for Mario Kart 8, so I can see why the visual polish is really, really great. So I'm happy about that. A lot of people have mentioned the potential for this game to go esports. I feel like there's a really big uphill battle if they're going to get that done, because motion controls have such a stigma, and even if this game does have button controls, which really does up its chances quite a bit, there's going to be a lot of people who ridicule this game, much like some of the other more traditional fighting game communities really ridiculed Smash at first, and sometimes they still do. So this game, I mean, if Splatoon can have a competitive scene, and they use gyro controls, and those are proven really good gyro controls, I feel like this game can also have its own competitive scene, even if people mock it. I don't care. I'm just really looking forward to seeing how Nintendo fleshes out this concept and what it can be. And I had a thought on how they could handle some of the button controls, because you have the tilting of the Joy-Cons that you use to move around and to twist your punches so that they can curve. And I think they could get away with something similar to how they handled Katamari, where each individual analog stick could be one of your hands. So if you push it forward, that would be a punch. If you push it forward and then start tilting, that would just start curving. Then if you tilted both left and right, that would be moving left and right. Blocking would just be moving the two analog sticks toward each other. And then you could use the triggers to dash and jump. So it's not that hard to imagine how a button control scheme could be handled for ARMS. So yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about this one, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. I think the next big game that they showed was Splatoon 2, which of course I'm very excited about because I'm a huge Splatoon fan. I played that game a lot before I got too busy to play video games, but I'm really glad that this is a complete sequel, and I predicted that. I was telling people this is not just an enhanced port, this is an actual sequel. Everything is too different to be an enhanced port, although a lot of people now are saying that it's not enough new content to be justified as a sequel, and I really disagree with them. But I don't know, they also have to kind of prove that this new game has enough new content, and I think they can do that in the form of a single player campaign, because if they flesh out that single player campaign to be a little bit more robust than what it was in the original game, it's going to be really easy to justify calling it Splatoon 2. And I'm so glad they didn't call it Splatoon with a 2 instead of the TOO. I hated that name because it sounds just like Splatoon, or it just looks like Splat 1. I don't know. I hated that name. But yeah, I'm really glad that they're sort of changing up a little bit of the balance. One of the big things that I noticed is that, well, rather what they said, they actually told us about it, but you can charge a charger and then swim in your ink and then emerge from the ink and still have your weapon charged. So that's a big boost for the chargers, even though I never used a charger because I'm only good at the Tentatek and the Octoshot replica. But I'm glad that they're kind of doing that. I'm glad that they kind of replaced the Seekers with these new curling bombs, which can bounce, and you can also change the distance they travel before they explode. So that's cool. One thing I am a little bit weirded out by is the fact that none of the specials from the first game are going to be coming back. And that was a little bit shocking, but I kind of understand why they would do that, because if they have to balance all of these new specials with the old specials, it would be a little bit hard to get a really good balance, I imagine. What it seems like they're doing is trying to capture the essence of some of the original specials, but change it up in ways that give you maybe a little bit more control. Like, for instance, the, I don't know what it's called, the Stingray something about stinging. I don't remember. Some of these names are probably going to change, by the way. But the one that looks like a pressure washer, that one, that goes through walls, much like the Killer Whale did. So they're kind of giving a different approach. The Killer Whale was obviously stationary, but this one you can kind of control it, and you can just shoot through the walls. Anybody who gets in the way of this giant beam of ink is just going to die. So that's pretty cool. There's a new type of bomb barrage, like a bomb dispenser that shoots several bombs, which is obviously similar to the Bomb Rush. And there's also the 2 giant missile launchers that shoot up to, up to 16 missiles based on how many opponents you actually target in your reticle. And those just launch up into the sky and then rain down. So that's obviously very similar to the Ink Strike. Also, I really like the sort of Din's Fire thing that they've got going on, where basically you just slam your fist onto the ground and there's this giant explosion of ink, and you can actually use that mid-super jump so that you can essentially take advantage of people who think you're just jumping to your doom, when in reality you're just going to come down and just explode everybody who's nearby. So I think that's really clever. It basically seems like they're taking all of the old specials and then remixing them in ways that gives you more fine-tuned control or more involvement in how they play out. So I think I'm pretty happy about that. I really like the new Inkopolis Square, although I kind of wish it wasn't called Inkopolis. I wish it was a new city, but I get it. Really love the music. I love the remixes of the 1 Minute Left theme and the finish, or the victory theme. And once again, I'm really glad that you can use a gyroscope with the Pro Controller, so I don't have to sacrifice my playstyle. I'm just overall really pumped, and can't wait to see more. And it's coming out in the summer, so it's not too far off. I mean, we're already practically 2/3 of the way through January, so that's like 1 or 2/36 of the way through the year. What am I saying? Anyways, Splatoon 2 sounds great. I'm looking forward to it. What else do we got here? Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. This is the really enhanced port, and people predicted that, of course, from the original Switch trailer. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of core changes to the game, but there are some new characters, of course, and there's the big new battle mode, which is the big selling point. I'm probably going to get it just for that reason alone, but I don't really have much else to say about it. Obviously, there's going to be Inklings in this game, which is really cool. They're pushing really close to that Smash card. It's going to happen. Just give it a few years, guys. But yeah, I don't really have much else to say about this because it's obviously it's not a new game. So it's cool that they're doing it. A lot of people who didn't buy the Wii U are probably going to enjoy that like crazy, and they're not going to have to suffer through the battle mode that was on the original version. So yeah, pretty happy about that. One game that was a pleasant surprise was Snipperclips. This really fun, simple game that seems to be getting a lot of love from the gaming media as well. So it seems like a lot of people are in agreement with me. I think this game is going to be really fun. And even though it's simple, I guess you could call it a casual game. I know the word casual has such a negative connotation in the gaming community these days, but if you look at games like Ultimate Chicken Horse or Overcooked, this game definitely has the same kind of vibe where you just have a lot of casual fun and just get together with a few friends, play some local multiplayer. It seems like a good time. And if they have any sort of element where you have to complete these levels to varying degrees. Like if there's a star system or a rank system where you got 1 star on this level versus you got 3 stars, or you beat it in a specific time limit to reach a certain threshold, there's going to be like a completionist element to where you try to get the highest rank in all of the levels. And I feel like that's going to add a lot of value to this game. I don't know if that's actually there. I'd have to look again at some of the gameplay from the Treehouse or something like that. But I feel like there's a lot of potential for this game to have a lot of lasting replay value. And I think that is very attractive. I also really love the facial expressions that the characters make when you're like running at your partner trying to cut them up just to mess with them. And it's like the characters' expressions just capture the exact same feeling that you have when you're trying to kill your partner. It's really great. I don't know. But yeah, I'm really happy about Snipperclips. I'm glad other people seem to be latching onto it as well. I don't care if you're a hater. If you hate it, then we're not friends anymore. Sorry. Let's see, what else is there? Let's talk about Super Mario Odyssey. Now, this game really took a lot of people by surprise in the way that they opened it, just with a panning shot of the city, New Donk City as they call it. And what I think is funny is that if you look back to the original trailer for the Switch, the teaser sort of trailer, and you look at that Mario footage, there's one of the buildings has this shop-looking thing. There's a door and there's a logo over the door that says Crazy Cap or Crazy Caps. I can't remember, but that logo is on full display at the beginning of the new trailer. So if you remembered that Crazy Cap logo, then you knew right off the bat when you looked at this trailer that this is the Mario game. But I guess people were just paying attention to the cityscape and they just didn't notice all of the Donkey Kong references on the street signs and things like that. But yeah, very clever opening, Nintendo. Way to throw us off guard. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, with me being a person who has an eye for aesthetics, you're probably wondering what I think of the New Donk City with all the realistic people in it. And to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of that particular visual direction. I think they could have easily made those people slightly more cartoony to match Mario's aesthetic a little bit more. And I understand that this is sort of like a dimensional hopping kind of game where you're traveling through all of these very foreign worlds, because the Mushroom Kingdom is apparently populated entirely by Toads, Goombas, Koopas, and all sorts of weird creatures. So the fact that Mario and Wario and Luigi and Waluigi Princess Peach all exist as humans in that world, I mean, who knows how they got there? But there are other humans if you consider the Mario sports games, like there's some characters in Mario Golf that are human. So I see no reason why they couldn't have gone with a similar aesthetic to that. And I understand that the Mario sports games aren't developed by Nintendo's core teams. It's developed by, I believe, Camelot. So I see why they wouldn't necessarily go with those styles, and I know the characters in Mario Golf were kind of just generic anime-looking characters, but they could have easily made the people in New Donk City look a little bit more in line with what you would typically expect from a Mario game. So I am a little bit on the fence about that, but I do understand that there's plenty of variety between all of the different worlds in this game. You've got the food world with the fork people, and you've got that sort of desert with the ice all over it and the Day of the Dead vibe. I really like that place. So I'm going to be okay probably by the end of the process of development, but I'm still trying to get over the disconnect between Mario and the humans in New Donk City. It feels really, a lot of people have made the comparison, it feels really Sonic Adventure to me, and I'm not really down with it, but we'll see how it plays out. I'm just going to give it the benefit of the doubt, and I'm just going to move on to what is probably the most exciting trailer that we saw, which was The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And boy, did they finish on a strong note. That was such a spectacular trailer, and it gave you a lot of these interesting story beats. It showed off a lot of the voice acting, and I will say that the English voice acting, especially for Impa and what I assume is the Deku Tree speaking, they sounded a little bit, phoned in. But Zelda sounds pretty good. I don't care what you think about the different crying and the different languages. It'll probably all come together. I do wonder if they're going to give you the option to use the Japanese voice acting with the English subtitles. So if they have those sorts of options, I imagine a lot of people will be happy. But I'm starting to get to the point where I don't want to spoil myself further on Zelda Breath of the Wild content, because we're getting to that point where they're starting to show a little bit more about the story. And a lot of the Zelda tubers like Zeltic and HMK have started delving into what some of these scenes could imply about the story and the plot. And I really don't want to know the overall plot before I go in, so I might start going dark on Zelda stuff. But They really pulled out all the stops for this trailer, and they showed off more races. We saw a Goron, we saw a Great Fairy, or what I assume is a Great Fairy. We saw Zoras, we saw the Koroks again, we saw a Gerudo, or what I assume is a Gerudo. We saw a few more locales like the Gerudo Village, and what I assume is the walk up to Death Mountain, which was just this desolate wasteland with all these dead trees. Really great stuff. I'm so excited to explore that world and to see how they fleshed out all of these different elements from seemingly every single corner of the Zelda timeline. The Koroks are there, the Gerudo are there, and Ganon is there. It really is like they took all of the best elements of Zelda history and tried to put it in one game, and that does make it difficult for timeline speculation, I will say. So I'm not even trying right now. I'm just gonna let it be what it is. Personally, I've never been one to really fuss about how the timeline comes together. I've always been more of a sort of literal legend kind of person, and not in the respect that every single game is just a retelling of the same legend, but rather every single game is a telling of one part of Zelda history, and even if some of the minor details don't line up between the games, it's not a big deal because it's still just a legend being told. So that's my take on the timeline. Not that you really cared, but yeah, I'm so excited about Zelda. I mean, I feel like that goes without saying. Everybody is excited about Zelda, so I'm really going to be waiting with bated breath before this game comes out. Unintentional pun. I don't think I'm going to talk about any of the other games that they showed. I know Xenoblade 2 is a big deal, but I've never played a Xenoblade game, so maybe that is a bad thing and I should invest the time, but I can't really play these giant games all the time. I feel like I have to make an exception for Zelda because I just have to play Zelda, but I don't have time for like a giant JRPG. Like, I'm an adult, man. I've got to get things done. But yeah, I'm really optimistic about all of the software that they showed. It's a very promising lineup leading into the end of the year, and I imagine that they're really going to be firing on all cylinders when it comes to putting out really great quality content. Hopefully new IPs, hopefully we see stuff like Pikmin 4 in the future. Reggie did say that there's still going to be some reveals before March, so we'll see what that's all about. It's really just the marketability of this console that really worries me, and I feel like they can't make any more missteps. I think they have to nail every remaining part of this launch, otherwise they might not get the adoption that they need to really keep those third parties on board, because I imagine third parties are already going to have trouble porting their games to the system because they're going to have to kind of downscale them, and it's only going to be worth it if they have the audience on this console. So, Nintendo, get it together. I'm really rooting for you, and I'm really looking forward to playing on the Switch because it seems like it's going to be really, really great. It's going to be the best of all of Nintendo, and whether or not that's a good thing for everybody else, we'll see. But I'm just going to cut this off here. I'm coming up on 50 minutes, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will probably make another one of these about something other than the Switch because I feel like I need a little bit more variety in this series. So yeah, I'm curious to see what you guys thought of everything, so let me know in the comments, and I will be sure to read as many of those as I can. And until next time, I have been Artsy Omni, and I will see you guys later.